Hi there. It's April the 22nd, and we're concluding our voyage through the book of Joshua with Joshua chapter 24. Remembered in the Hebrew scriptures, Joshua is one of the former prophets, and in this chapter, this last chapter, Joshua tells the story of Israel, calls the people to obedience to God, and at the end of the chapter he dies. So Joshua begins with Abraham himself and with the patriarchs and goes through the story of Israel going down into Egypt, of their deliverance through Moses and Aaron, the giving of the law, the coming out of the desert and the overcoming of the kings, their deliverance of the promised land into their hands, and their settling. And at the end of the story that Joshua tells, he calls them to obey God. He calls them to put away the foreign gods that would have been worshipped in Egypt and that the people around them are worshipping, and to worship only God. And he calls on them to covenant to do this. In fact, he says himself, choose this day whom you are going to serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And the people respond, far be it from us to serve any other God than God. We will serve him alone. And so Joshua sets this down in writing. He actually makes a covenant, and in that covenant he inscribes that covenant in a record, and he puts that record into the actual book of the law of God, and sets up a stone as well at Shechem, where this is a witness for the people that they have made this promise to God. Now Shechem's a significant place because it's modern-day Nablus in the West Bank, and it's situated right in the valley between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And this is the two mountains, the two hills where the people of Israel went up and they spoke out the blessings and the curses that would be upon them in the keeping or the not keeping of the law. And so it's a significant place at Shechem that they actually make this promise, and it's a witness, and there's a stone set up, a memorial stone, as a witness to what they've promised God to do in this last stage of Joshua's life. So Joshua dies at the end of this chapter at the age of 110, and he is buried in Kiryat Serah, the place that belongs to him, that has been ceded to him. But there's also another burial takes place. They've carried the bones of Joseph from Egypt all the way through their wanderings, and now at last the bones of Joseph are deposited in the burial ground that Jacob had bought in Shechem, and so at last he comes to his final resting place as well. So it's the end of an era. In fact, the last person who's mentioned to die in this chapter is Eleazar, Aaron's son. So there's a kind of an end of an era, and with that we come to the end of this book of Joshua. It's worth noting that the covenant that Joshua makes is part of the great unfolding covenant that was made initially with Abraham. These aren't fresh covenants that negate the old ones, but they are the renewing and the deepening and the widening of the covenant that was originally made with Abraham, that God makes with us still and includes us in. So this covenant that is made here by Joshua at Shechem is actually a continuation and an establishing of that same covenant, which will one day be renewed through Messiah Jesus at his death, when he says, "This is the blood of the new covenant in my blood, poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins." Have a very good April the 22nd.